Summer had always been my favorite time of the year. Every vacation, I visited my grandparents in Blackwood Hollow, a small, quiet village nestled deep in the countryside of the USA. The village was surrounded by dense forests, endless fields, and a river so vast that it looked like it had no end. My grandpa owned a few horses, and I loved riding them in the golden sunsets. But my absolute favorite thing? Fishing. The river was alive with fish, and Grandpa and I would spend hours casting our lines into the water. But what I loved most about Blackwood Hollow was the gaming store near my grandma's house. It was the liveliest place in the village, especially at night. People gathered there to play, talk, and escape the quiet eeriness of the village. My grandpa and I had a ritual. We played pool every night. He was incredibly skilled, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. We would return home around 10 or 11 p.m., much to my grandma's annoyance. She hated when we stayed out late. But that one night was different. That afternoon, Grandpa and I had gone fishing. By the time we returned, he was exhausted. When I asked if we were still going to the gaming store, he shook his head. "Not tonight, Gio. I'm too tired." I frowned. I didn't want to skip a night. I wanted to go. "Then let me take the car," I said, knowing full well what his answer would be. Grandpa gave me a sharp look. "You don't have a license yet. No way." I knew arguing was pointless, but then he smirked and led me to the garage. There, leaning against the wall, was an old bicycle. "Take this. It's in perfect condition, and the gaming store is only 5 minutes away." I sighed, but I took the bike and pedaled toward the store. When I arrived, something felt off. Usually the store was packed with people, but that night, it was nearly empty. Only a few familiar faces were there, including my best friend Jackson. "Where is everyone?" I asked. Jackson barely looked up from his game. "New moon," he muttered. I frowned. "So what? Why would that matter?" Jackson hesitated, then shook his head. "Forget it." That's when I heard her. A frail, quivering old woman's voice. "You want to know the story?" I turned. Sitting in the corner of the store, rocking slowly in an old wooden chair, was a granny I had never seen before. Her eyes were milky white, her fingers thin and bony. The store was dimly lit, but something about her face sent a shiver down my spine. "Yes," I said. She took a deep breath and began. 10 years ago, a girl from this village went missing. For 7 days, the whole village searched for her. Then, on the night of the new moon, they found her. But not the way they had hoped. She was dead. Her body was discovered near the river, torn apart, as if something had ripped her open. My stomach twisted. From that night on, the granny continued, her spirit remained. Some say she whispers in the dark, calling out to people, and those who follow her voice are never seen again. A cold chill crept down my spine. The store suddenly felt smaller, quieter. The flickering neon lights hummed in the silence. I glanced at the clock. 11:40 p.m. Shit. I was late. I jumped to my feet, bid a quick goodbye to Jackson and the granny, and rushed outside. The night felt heavier than usual. The gaming store's neon lights flickered behind me as I grabbed my bicycle, eager to get home. But the moment I started pedaling, something felt wrong. The bike struggled beneath me, its movement sluggish, unnatural. A faint squeaking noise echoed in the silence. I stopped. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced down at the wheels. Flat. Punctured. I hadn't hit anything. How had it gone flat? A wave of unease settled over me. The village houses stood dark and lifeless, their windows like hollow eyes. The moonless night stretched endlessly above me, swallowing the road ahead in an abyss of black. My phone's flashlight became my only salvation, a weak and feeble glow barely pushing back the shadows. I sighed and started walking, pushing my useless bicycle along the dirt road. Then, the silence changed. The usual hum of crickets was gone. The whispering breeze had stilled. The night was holding its breath. And then, I heard it. A voice. Software. Familiar. calling my name. Gio. I stopped. My breath hitched in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from the road. It came from my right. Slowly, I turned my head. There, standing tall and unnaturally still, was a sugarcane field. The stalks rose 8 feet high, thick and densely packed. Even as I lifted my flashlight, the beam could barely scratch the surface of the darkness inside. I swallowed. My skin prickled with cold sweat. "Gio!" The voice came again. Closer this time. And this time, I recognized it. It was my grandmother. But Grandma was at home. My heart pounded against my ribs. The gaming store story rushed back to me. The missing girl, the whispers in the dark, the ones who followed them, never returned. "It's just in your head," I whispered to myself. I forced my feet forward, faster. Then, "Gio, come here." The voice was inside the sugarcane field. I froze. A cold dread wrapped around my spine, squeezing tight. Grandma wouldn't be here. She couldn't be here. Yet her voice, so soft, so familiar, it sounded so real. I clenched my fists. My pulse roared in my ears. Something deep in my gut screamed at me to keep walking. But my feet disobeyed. I took a step forward, then another, then another. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I raised it toward the field. The light barely pushed through the first few stalks before being swallowed by absolute darkness. "Gio, help me." My breath shuddered out of my lungs. The air around me felt thick, wrong. I stepped closer, the sugarcane rustling ever so slightly, as if something was shifting inside, watching. Then, a blinding flash of light. My entire body jolted. A car's headlights pierced the darkness, flooding the road with sudden, violent brightness. And in that instant, I realized where I was. I had wandered deep into the sugarcane field, so deep that without the headlights, no one would have seen me. A car door slammed shut. A voice cut through the night. "J-I-O! Grandpa!" His voice shattered the trance. My entire body screamed at me to move. Then, I heard it, rustling, breathing, right behind me, too close. Something was there. I didn't turn around. I ran. I crashed through the thick stalks, my arms scraped raw by the sharp leaves. Something behind me moved. Something followed. I burst onto the road, gasping, my legs nearly collapsing beneath me. Grandpa rushed toward me, his face pale, eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Fear. "Gio, what the hell were you doing in there?" he yelled. I couldn't answer. My body wouldn't stop shaking. Grandpa grabbed my arm, his grip firm, and pulled me into the car. As we sped home, I dared to glance back at the field. The sugarcane stalks stood perfectly still, unmoving, silent. But I swear, I saw something watching from the darkness. That night, I barely slept. The next day, Grandpa finally told me everything. About how every new moon, someone disappeared. About how the girl's ghost still called out to the living. And the worst part? I had almost answered.